Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The precepts of the natural law are the practical reason, but the first principles of demonstrations are the speculative reason. They're self-evident principles. Now that doesn't mean that we all are aware of them all the time, but they're things that are very general. They cover a lot of situations. Speculative reason, it would be things like the whole is greater than the parts. I mean, does anybody need that proved to them? A house is more than the door. You all get that, right? That's self-evident. When we get to particular examples, it starts to get a little bit sticky sometimes. There we're moving from the general to the particular. Now he says that practical reason works that way too. There are certain rules or commands or ideas that are so fundamental, so basic, and when you say them, they almost sound like common sense. But they're sometimes easy to deviate from as well. So he says a certain order is to be found in those things that are apprehended universally. What do we apprehend? What do we take in universally? Well, everything that you're looking at has being. It's real. It has existence. So the notion of this is included in all things, whatever a person apprehends. He says, so as being is the first thing that falls under the apprehension, so good is the first thing that falls under the apprehension of your practical reason. Good is the broadest category. There's a lot of different ways in which things can be good. We've looked at that a lot this semester, right? So, the practical reason is directed to action, to doing things, to what you ought to do. And it's directed towards ends. So the first principle of practical reason, he says, is good is that which all things seek after. The first precept of the natural law is good is to be done, and where is that? Oh, done and pursued. Evil is to be avoided. That's pretty general, right? That covers an awful lot of ground. That doesn't give you an awful lot of concrete guidance in things, does it? But that's something that's built into the fabric of your thinking. That can be turned off, though. When somebody actually chooses to do something and they say, I know this is wrong, but I want to do it because I want to do what's wrong. They would be actually going against this, the highest principle of practical reason. Kind of tough to do. Usually when somebody does something like that, they're really seeking some other good. I'd like to do this because I like screwing people over. Well, then you like screwing people over, and that's what you're viewing as a good. Probably because you derive security from it, or power, or pleasure, or something like that. Now, this is really vague, though. It's almost, I've used this example before. Does anybody know Google's ethics thing that they would always say? Don't be evil. Now, does that tell you an awful lot? No. Don't be evil.
I had an interview with a company last week, and they asked me if the rules out there strict no asshole policy.
What did you say?
I said I didn't know about it, but I'm all for it.
The trouble becomes how do you define it, though, right? What's that?
No asshole.
Well, there may be some paradoxes involved with that. It all depends on how you define the terms, doesn't it? And when it comes to good and evil, it's really a matter of specification. So we need something a bit more concrete than that. So Thomas says, okay, well, let's look now then not just at being as a whole, let's look at human beings. What are our different levels? What are the different dimensions of human being? And he says, all those things to which man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as being good in some way, and consequently as objects of pursuit, their contraries as evil and objects of avoidance. What is it that we're naturally inclined to? Well, let's start with the broadest thing. What do we share in common with all other beings? He says, there's first of all an inclination to good in accordance with the nature which you and I have in common with all other substance. What is it that all beings try to do? Besides fulfill their end and that. What's one thing that you can say they all have in common?
Enjoy life.
Not everything he necessarily enjoys. That is, if plants enjoy things, they enjoy them in a very different way than we do. But let's think about plants. What do they do?
You survive, is that what you get in it?
Yes.
Okay.
All things attempt to continue in being. So, we have to make bigger things here. All things, like he says, desire or seek the preservation of their own being according to their nature. So, the nature of this iPhone is just a piece of technology, but, it does report when something gets screwed up on it. That's not much of an inclination, in any sort of sense. This actually does hold together as an object. It's plastic. Actually it may hold together longer than I do, because plastic is hard to break down, it turns out. This chalk, generally stays together until I wipe it on the board. Plants, more complex things, react to their environment. They turn towards the sun, the source of nourishment. They can't move from place to place, which makes them kind of vulnerable, right? Animals move from place to place, most of them. There's oysters, they stay there for the most part, but most animals move from place to place, seek their food and things like that. They try to continue in being. Don't we do that too? Don't we do a lot of things for the sake of survival? Yeah. What else? Now let's move to a higher level. What do animals do? Plants do this too in a certain way. iPhones don't do it, and pieces of chalk don't do it. What do they do? Yeah. Very good. Plants do this. Right? They have ovum and pollen, and they do sexual reproduction in some kind of interesting way. Flowers, by the way, are the sex parts of plants. If you think about it, might turn you off from flowers. I don't know.
They're actually a particular part too.
What's that?
They're actually a particular part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And petals are actually adapted leaves. And other animals reproduce. Some of them reproduce in kind of weird ways, like earthworms, I guess, can change their sex, and they basically just rub against each other. Insects do all sorts of kind of interesting things. Some of them, only exist for the purpose of mating. Like bees, male bees in the hive. The only purpose they have is to mate with the queen, and then after that they kick them out, and the male bees seem to be okay with it, because that's their inclination. What do some animals do that goes beyond just making babies? You get to higher animals. What do they start doing?
So like taking care of their babies or whatever it is they had.
Yeah. Now, they don't all do this. Alligators will eat other baby alligators. apparently a mother alligator will defend the nest to a certain extent, but sometimes they just bury the eggs and take off, and that's it. If they run into their babies, they eat them off. But alligators are kind of low on the level. They're reptiles. Mammals are pretty unique. I mean, our adaptation is making milk, and why do you need to make milk? Well, because babies need milk, and it's a way of passing on nutrients. And do all mammals then continue to take care of their babies? No, as a matter of fact, some of them will try to kill them too, like tomcats. You want to keep the tomcat away from the kittens because they'll try to kill the kittens too. But the higher you get up, the more and more caregiving there is. Yeah.
Well, like dolphins, like they don't. It's not just the parents. It's like their whole pack, I guess, or whatever you call.
Yeah, and the same
how
thing.
Dolphins travel. It's interesting, like how they all participate in it.
Yeah. Is there a school of dolphins? I don't know.
I think
School of
that's
fish.
what fish are referred to, probably like. A school
Oh no, a
or
pod. Because whales are
really?
a pod. What is it?
I've heard gam.
A gam? Could be.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Like gamma dolphins.
Yeah, I mean, you see this with some apes too. I mean, one thing about chimpanzees, they are pretty brutal creatures, much more brutal than gorillas. I mean, the gorillas really get a bad rap. You watch those Planet of the Apes, it's the gorillas that are the mean ones. They got it completely backwards. The chimpanzees are the ones who, want to kill each other. But they will take care of others young. And it's really interesting. If you look at between species, animals will actually sometimes adopt babies, not even of their species.
There was actually a special those lions who adopted a baby in Holland.
Yeah, I saw that. And everyone's waiting. When is she going to eat it?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
There was another one where a leopard adopted a baby back when African ways.
Yeah. What's interesting is a lot of these animals, it turns out that their instincts are a little bit less hardwired and more needing things to happen in their environment than we thought. One of the shows that I used to watch with my daughter that I really enjoyed was they would do these animal rescues of these rhinos and hippos and elephants and animals like that, wild animals, and who lost their mothers and were outside of any sort of pack or pride or anything like that. And they'd bring them into an enclosure, and then quite often they'd pair them up with another animal of a different species who was also a young. And eventually they'd start to play together. So you would think elephants would only play with other elephants, but actually elephants will play with rhinos, or will play with apes or things like that. They will bond with each other. There have actually been cases with older animals having pets, at least with gorillas, like having kittens. Now that's not happening in the wild, right? But they do this with researchers, and so it brings out something within them, something that again, natural law is a matter of inclinations, and we are not unique in what we show towards infants. Yeah.
Sorry to go off topic, but I thought I'd put this out there. I don't know if anybody here has seen, there's this guy that raised lion cubs from when they were young.
Oh yeah.
They're now like full-grown male lions, and they play around with him and treat him like he's the leader of the pack, the guy.
And there's that famous video too of that guy who goes to Africa. Yeah. And everyone's thinking that the lion's going to eat him. And they said, the lions don't remember people. You don't go out there because we're not going to be responsible. And sure enough, he goes out there, and you see on the video the lion kind of like creeping up, and you're like, oh, this is going to be bad. And then it hugs him.
Yeah.
Because that again, part of a higher animal nature is this bonding that takes place. And that's just not just to do with instinct, but with emotion, with affection, with something that develops. The third thing that he talks about is an inclination to the good according to the nature of reason. What makes us distinctively human again? And each one of these takes a fairly determinate shape. So, one of the So you want to make this a little bit more specific to continue in being. What can we derive from that? The inclination, or the precept, is that what belongs to the natural law? Whatever is a means of preserving human life warding off obstacles. So the natural law says that you should respect life, human life in particular, because that is our kind. It doesn't necessarily say, well, screw all the other animals, do whatever you want to them. Thomas isn't saying that, but he is saying there's something distinctive about this. So when you see somebody threatening another person, and you feel that that's wrong, that's because there's an inclination in you that is coming from, our being that's woven into us, and that inclination is right. When you want to help somebody who is sick, that's warding off whatever is, an obstacle to human life. Whatever is a means of preserving human life. What do we need to preserve our lives? What are our basic needs that we have? Food, yeah, food and shelter. Providing other people food and shelter, not just ourselves. You notice that this isn't just about our own self-preservation. This is about the preservation of other human beings. Providing other people with food and shelter when they don't have it is fulfilling the natural law. Depriving them of food or shelter would be against the natural law, wouldn't it? So going and burning somebody's house down is not just a bad thing because you took away their property. It's a bad thing because you actually took away their shelter. As they sometimes say when they're being melodramatic, taking food out of my children's mouths. If somebody actually is doing that by whatever they're doing in the workplace to somebody else, then they're violating the natural law. There are certain basic needs, certain basic things that the natural law says that everybody ought to be given. Can you think of any others? Food, shelter, medical care, perhaps? Yeah.
I was going to say air, but last class you said that we kind of just do it on our own.
I think you're right.
But it's...
Yeah, I think certain environmental things, access to water, could be a matter of the natural law as well. Clean air. Water, it's a big issue here being discussed in New York because of the fracking thing. Are they going to allow these chemicals to be driven underground to bring out other things, which may strip the water supply? That could be thought of in terms of the natural law. Let's move on to the next one. We have reproduction and raising young. So, what does the natural law actually tell us that we ought to do? We ought to, in fact, have sexual intercourse. Otherwise, the species dies out, right? We have a natural instinct towards that. And the natural law would tell us it should be exercised in certain ways. For instance, sort of radical promiscuity, screwing anything that moves, would not be, fulfilling that instinct in a way in accordance with reason. I mean, just think, today, how many things could go wrong with that. Back in Thomas's time, they didn't have syphilis, let alone other PEDs. Syphilis is horrific by itself, but it's not as common as some of the other things that we have to worry about as well, right? Well, what are some of the other things that you'd have to worry about? Just go out and follow your sexual instinct wherever it happens to lead. Well, how could that go wrong?
Get a random girl pregnant.
Yeah. I mean,
kids will be
if you're going to have children, you should actually be prepared to take care of them. What else? Why else is it a bad idea to sleep with anybody who will possibly sleep with you? It's what? It's just gross? Well, yeah, I mean, if you set your bar very low, then it's probably not going to be that pleasurable. So let's say you actually add a proviso in there. Sleep with anybody who will sleep with you who you don't find gross. What else? It's still, why?
It's going overboard.
Okay, now again, you're you have a properly functioning faculty of reason that you're actually listening to, and it's recognizing certain inclinations. There's certain goods that you would deprive yourself of, and also, like you're making a good point, deprive other people of, by just indulging your sexual appetite indiscriminately. Raising children. What does raising children involve? I mean, that's something to think about with this too. Does that mean just showing up, putting food on the table, saying, all right, get to it? What do you have to do if you have kids? A lot of responsibility, isn't it? Something some people have to do.
Guide them,
How so?
just to teach them right from wrong.
That's a big one. I mean, if you're actually telling your kids, go and beat up the other kids and take their lunch money, you're not fulfilling the natural law. You're not raising your kids well, are you? Actually, that wouldn't fit over here, too. If you don't have teachers, then you have to teach your kids. We can actually farm out a lot of this child raising stuff to teachers and other people, daycare workers. If you're going to do that, you should probably actually check them out. I think these days, if you want to get to the nitty-gritty of this, the natural law would probably say you should have a good idea of what those in charge of your kids are actually doing with them, because the kids are ultimately your responsibility. What else do you have to do? Is it enough just to sort of like put up the guardrails? Yeah.
Nourishment?
Nourish them, yeah. You mean just food, or?
I guess food and make sure you have what they essentially need, like a
That-
house.
That's important too. What else should you give children though? Yeah. What's
I
that?
think he said it. Yeah,
Love,
there you go.
yes. It's parents who don't love their children, and it's tough to love kids sometimes, actually. Quite frankly, it takes work sometimes. Parents who don't love their children are actually, in Thomas's view, violating the natural law. And if they thought about it, if reason was functioning well with them, they could figure out, hey, I'm screwing up. I need to fix this. I need to do things differently. Sometimes parents have those sort of moments of realization. And what would keep them from doing that? Well, think about if you're getting the wrong messages from society, if your passions are disordered, it's going to be much harder to love your children as you ought to. When we get to the even higher level, the distinctively human level, and I do want to say this is distinctively human too. We love our children in ways that horses and other animals don't. If we get to the higher level, where it has to do with reason, he says, there is in every person a natural inclination to act according to reason, and this is to act according to virtue. So we should, in fact, actually cultivate the virtues. If we speak of virtuous acts, then those are going to involve a lot of different applications of reason. What else, though? We have a natural inclination to do two other things that's really important. Two other things that are really distinctive to us human beings. One is to live in society. Now, we talked about this before. Other animals do have somewhat of a social organization. They don't debate about it. Dogs don't say, should we have a dictatorship or a democracy? What sort of rules should we make for this pack? They just sort of, do things. Bees, do incredibly interesting things. Actually, ants are even more complex. But ants don't sit down and say, is our society on the right track or not? The other thing that Thomas says, and this is where I'm going to leave you, because I'm actually holding you over a little bit, unfortunately, and I apologize for that, is to know about God. Thomas thinks that that's part of the natural law, that that's something distinctive to us. And there again, we're moving into this very theological dimension, so I think that's a good place to stop.